Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we have the latest from the live radar. Run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as we still have a fairly warm weekend, but we are seeing lots of areas of rain and even some heavy thunderstorms starting to break out. Now it's the first kind of thunderstorm event of the year, again expected as we do head into spring, but we've got low pressure coming up from the south, bumping into this slightly warmer air that we've had over the past few days, and it is triggering some pretty hefty showers and thunderstorms. You can see a few of them starting to break out on the live radar at the moment, and they're going to increasing activity through the afternoon and evening, and we could see another outbreak, potentially perhaps more pop-up storms as we head into Sunday afternoon in the south and southeast as well. So we'll look at the latest for those. But as we head into early next week, we do see some high pressure temporarily building in, so it should turn it slightly drier and should still remain fairly mild. For later on next week, it does start to turn a bit cooler with a northwesterly flow and more unsettled once again, as we do start to see Atlantic systems pushing back in. As we head into the longer range, very mixed as we head towards the end of March and start of April, but generally speaking, the overall theme is for slightly more unsettled conditions. Nothing too stormy or washout conditions, but more unsettled, meaning most days there will be a moderate chance of precipitation, but also it will be cooler as well, with air masses coming in more from the north or northwest. So yes, it's been fairly warm the last few days, fairly energetic and humid, but it will be dissipating away, and we'll be back towards something more around average or below average to end March and start April. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now if you start on the live radar, you can see we've got a whole array of showers around at the moment. Some longer spells of rain that are clearing northwards. We saw some weather fronts moving through last night. Didn't dump too much in the way of rain, but most areas saw a few hours of light to moderate precipitation as that clears through. And you can kind of see the arc of this precipitation is kind of the northern extent of the low pressure system, and it's towards the centre, which is further southwards. We've still got a bit of warm air, but also lower pressure. We're starting to see heavy showers starting to get sort of triggered. Now you can see there are kind of two areas that we need to watch out for. There's this disturbance, I think it's an occluded front that's coming up the eastern edge of the United Kingdom, and you can see there's some light to moderate rain, but also some thunderstorms breaking out on the leading edge. This is slowly pushing northwards and slowly westwards, kind of against the normal flow, but with low pressure sat to our south, it is an east or southeasterly wind, so it's not actually too unusual in these sort of setups for this to be heading this way. So if you are in Yorkshire, the Peak District, northwest England, these hefty showers are slowly heading your way, and they could get more widespread and a bit more energetic through this evening. For most, it's predominantly heavy rain, on and off heavy rain, some torrential rain at times. But for some, as you can see where we've got these darker red patches, there is the scope for thunderstorms, lightning, hail, gusty winds, so do watch out for those. Now further southwards, not too much activity yet, but we're expecting pop-up storms to break out. There's about one cell here just to the west of London that's starting to take off. We're expecting a more widespread outbreak as well across much of southern England into the Midlands as well. This is going to kind of combine up with this area of thunderstorms, and eventually we're going to end up with lots of heavy rain across Wales and northwest England. So this is slowly evolving. I'm recording this around 2 p.m, so we're expecting this to really take off in the next few hours, and by sunset that's probably where we're going to have our peak activity, and then slowly through the evening those thunderstorms will start to fade away, but that's where we see a more widespread risk of heavy rain further north to westwards. We'll look at the latest precipitation charts in a moment, and you'll be able to see what the rough evolution will be. Elsewhere, as I said, lots of on and off rain, but if you do avoid the showers, the thunderstorms and those longer spells of rain, it's not too bad today. Temperatures are actually pretty decent still. You can see we're avoiding that to the sort of west of those thunderstorms at the moment. Temperatures still into the high teens today. Still quite a lot of warm air around. You can see this towards those weather fronts where cooler air is starting to mix in. You can see more blues developing, but further south and eastwards into the near continent, still fairly warm. So we're early season, little warmer spell we're seeing here. Not lasting all too long, the actual warm and dry pattern, like we saw maybe Thursday, Friday for most, but now we're getting towards that sort of thundery breakdown. It's a little mini thundery breakdown, and that's evolving over the next 24 hours. Now, if I do go over to the latest UKV now, you can see all of that rain heading northwards through this morning, slowly clearing away, and then those thunderstorms breaking out. You can see there's initially a line across the eastern parts. Again, a bit more activity in practice than we're actually seeing on the UKV. Remember, with thunderstorms, the models do struggle. We'll look at the Arome run in a minute, which is a high-resolution run, one of the best runs that I've found historically for thunderstorms. It's kind of our go-to model when we're looking at thunderstorms historically. So we'll look at that in a moment's time. But you can generally see the two areas of storms, pop-up storms further southwards, more organised areas of storms further northwards and eastwards, and eventually it will kind of combine into a big clump of heavy showers and storms around this evening for parts of Wales, the Midlands into northwest England, and then slowly fade away through the evening into the morning. Eventually, by sunrise tomorrow morning, things are slowly clearing up. But then as we head through tomorrow afternoon, we start seeing another outbreak of storms in the far southeast. Lots of pop-up storms there around the London area, potentially developing within convergence zones, which could mean they're slow moving and dump a lot of rain in a short space of time in a very small localized area. So we need to keep a close eye on that. Those storms are fairly slow moving through Sunday afternoon, but they should slowly fade away once again around sunset. As we head into Monday, though, not too much in the way of rain. And that's because that low pressure system clears and more of a west to northwesterly flow is building in. But we do have a bit of a ridge of high pressure, which allows things to be slightly drier through Monday afternoon into the evening. Into Tuesday, still fairly dry, a bit more cloud around, and again, high pressure involved, but a little bit chillier with that northwesterly flow. And then slowly later in the week, cloud thickening and more of the way of showers and precipitation heading in from the northwest. And we're expecting it to go slightly more unsettled later on in the week. Again, no washout conditions. These are not huge, massive storm systems coming in off the North Atlantic, but they are low pressure systems. There are going to be areas of rain. There are going to be showers. So we've got to keep an eye out for that later on in the week. But at least the early part of the week, it's not going to be as warm as it was the last few days, but it still will be fairly pleasant. Now, if you look at the max temperatures, you can see through this afternoon, still mid to high teens, 15, 16, 17 degrees, where we see a bit of sunshine and avoid those thunderstorms. And the same can be said into Sunday in the far south and southeast. But further northwards, that cooler Atlantic area is pushing in, and we're all going to experience that into Monday. A frost potentially in the far north and west. And into Monday afternoon, you can see it is still pleasant, but look at those temperatures down towards 10 to 12 degrees, so much, much cooler. Into Tuesday, maybe slightly higher, 13, 14 degrees. And then finally into Wednesday, maybe nudging slightly higher, 13 to 16 degrees. So you can see, as I said, early on next week, we are going to see dry conditions return, but it is going to be a little bit cooler, back towards average or below average. And then as we head into the latter part of the week, expecting it to remain cool, but an increased chance of precipitation. Now, to go over to the Arome run and have a look at the latest on those thunderstorms, you can see through this afternoon, we've got those two distinct areas of storms breaking out. This frontal zone across parts of the East Midlands into East Anglia, and then pop-up storms breaking out. Not too many towards London, but more across the West Midlands and Wales here from the latest Arome run, all starting to take off in the next hour or two as I'm recording this. So by the time you're watching this, you have a look at the live radar. There's quite a high chance there's a lot more activity than we just saw as I'm recording this. Through the evening, though, you can see those storms really pick up around 4, 5, 6 p.m. That line of storms into the Peak District of northwest England, and then pop-up storms ahead of that, stretching from southeast England, potentially through the London area, into the West Midlands and North Wales. And slowly through the evening, you can see it all clumps together into a large area of very heavy rain. But slowly, those dark reds, those browns, which are the big cells that produce the torrential rain, those do start to fade away, and it just turns into a clump of moderate to heavy rain. So see, the main thunderstorm activity does dissipate around that 7-8 p.m. point, and then slowly fizzles away through the evening into more lighter rain by morning. And then into Sunday afternoon, another outbreak of showers and storms. Not as much activity here and not as much intensity, not as much cape. So perhaps still lively, but nothing to the level that the UKV was showing, which did have a lot more brighter colours. But nonetheless, shower activity still looks like a convergence zone there through the London area. So that'll be interesting to see. Even if it's not thunderstorms, it will still give miserable conditions through much of the day if we see those showers persist. We need to keep a very close eye on that. But as I said, it could bring some quite hefty rain around tomorrow morning through into the evening, before eventually all fading away into Monday. So you can see a lot of activity this weekend, nothing to the extent that we'd see in a summary thundery breakdown. But for mid-late March, it is pretty warm and it is going to be pretty thundery out there. So do keep a very close eye. As I said, the main risk is the torrential rain. There is a smaller risk of thunder and lightning and hail and those additional hazards. But as we saw from the live radar, in those darker red patches, that's where the risk is highest. So do stay safe out there over the coming hours. They don't look terribly slow moving, but they still could dump a lot of rain in a short space of time. So do be wary and do keep an eye on those live radars, as they'll be the best indicator when storms are imminent. Now do head over to the longer range charts now. If we start on the latest GFS, you can see why it's thundery at the moment. Southeasterly winds, like we said over the last few days, but the high pressure is moved up towards Scandinavia now, and it's been replaced by this little cut-off low. Now, it's not fully cut off. We still got a connection to the jet stream further northwards, but it is dipping southwards. It's this little lull in the flow, and it allows this low to kind of sit and spiral around much of northern Europe. As we can see by Monday, Tuesday, it gets pushed away, and we're under higher pressure, but with more of a westerly flow. The jet stream, though, becomes a bit more active later on next week, and you can see more low pressure systems making an influence. Definitely the GFS still is liking the look of more in the way of higher pressure, but still northwesterly winds, still cooler and unsettled spells. There is quite a strong signal, though, for some higher pressure blocking to return into early April. It is a sort of recurring theme within the model output. Not a lot of consistency in exactly how it goes about it, but a consistent theme that there will be high pressure trying to push into the Arctic, or at least further northwards. And you can see here from the latest GFS, it is streaming in northeasterly winds, pretty cold conditions and unsettled as well. And you can see that from those blues. So perhaps something slightly colder and unsettled into early April. Again, not surprised given the sudden stratospheric warming that we've seen in the last couple of weeks and the maintenance of those reversal high up in the atmosphere. So I'm not surprised of blocking patterns occurring in the longer range, but we'll just have to see if those do come to fruition. If you do look at the latest GM, it's very similar, but does have something slightly different at day 10. You see, again, the westerly flow does return this week with slightly chillier conditions, especially later on in the week, with more Atlantic flow, with lower pressure. But look what happens into the longer range. A bit of an Atlantic ridge. We actually unlock the doors to a pretty potent northerly flow. Again, not surprised with seeing that. Again, with the sudden stratospheric warming, it does increase the chances of an amplified jet stream. So this is a pretty bog standard chart to be seeing as a result of that SSW. But we're not seeing it from other runs. So an interesting chart here for day 8 from the GM. It is a potent northerly flow, but it doesn't last too long, and eventually it remains chilly with high pressure around, keeping us frosty, but hopefully still fairly dry. If we finally compare to the ECMWF, again, those westerly flows are getting unlocked over the coming days, but high pressure is still involved. But eventually low pressure does break through, and some more hefty lows there around day 10. Never fully pushing in though, high pressure still holding it off, as we saw from our longer range update we did on Thursday. Very strong signal for more Scandinavian blocks, and that's kind of exactly what we're seeing here. It's not a classic huge easterly wind, but it's holding off the Atlantic flow, which keeps it a little bit more settled, and you can see eventually even some easterly winds developing. So definitely seeing that those longer range charts we looked at on Thursday, which were ECMWF weekly anomaly charts, definitely looks like they're agreeing here to the operational run today. I'm not surprised by that. They are the same run, but you can kind of see those anomaly charts, what they would produce in fruition on one of our sort of daily videos on the operational run. You can see northeasterly winds, nothing again amazingly cold, upper air temperatures hovering around average or even slightly above average, but coming in from the northeast it would be a chilly wind direction. Not cold, but definitely a little bit chilly with the wind coming in off fairly cold North Sea. Now finally, if we look at the latest ensembles, you see we're above average over the next couple of days, dropping back towards average into next week, and then kind of up and down quite a lot. There's a lot more up and down here from the ensembles, but we actually have to look at the y-axis, and you can see that there's not a lot of spread if we're being completely honest. You know, the mildest runs might be 5 or 6 degrees at 850 HP, the coolest runs -2, so not actually too much spread there into next week, hovering instead around average, above and below. Precipitation is pretty minimal for a period of time early next week, for it does pick up once again later on into the longer term, but still doesn't look crazy. You know, precipitation is still fairly low. As I said, we're not seeing any massive lows pushing in, but small events like we're seeing today, which have cropped up at pretty short notice, thundery events, could produce locally quite a lot of rain, so we still have to take that into account. And finally, if we look at the latest ECMWF ensembles, broadly very, very similar. Up and down over the next couple of days. Eventually later on next week, we're back towards average or below average, and then hovering around average there into the early part of April. And again, quite a bit of precipitation, but no huge spikes, and again, no massive consistency at this stage. So, as I said, a slightly unsettled and cool theme looks like it could dominate there into early April. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Do stay safe without those thunderstorms throughout the next couple of days. And I'll see you again for another video soon.